Hey, it's John from Tinderbox Arts. So, when you're changing your own motorcycle tires, one of the first things you got to do is break the bead, the seal. And in order to do that, you need quite a lot of pressure. And there are some hand tools you can try to use to do that. But I've started using this redneck bead breaker. I'm not the inventor of this, but it works pretty well. Basically, you take a big 2x4, a long one, and you hook it under something that doesn't move. Like in this case, I'm using my commercial truck bumper. You could stick this under a tire, a car tire, attach it to a building, almost anything. But what I've done is just hang it from the bumper there. And then you need, somewhere down the line here, a short piece of 2x4. I've hung it off the bottom here so it's easy to move back and forth if I need to. And use that to press down on the bead. And so basically it's just a giant lever. Put your hand out here, give it a good force downward, and you'll break the bead, and then you just turn the wheel as you break the bead. Obviously, before you try to break the bead, you want to take your tool and remove the valve core and get all the air out, otherwise you can be fighting that. So when you first break the bead, you'll see the 2x4 goes well below the edge of the rim. That's how you know you've broken the bead. And now I'll just work my way around, make sure it's totally loose, flip the tire, or the wheel I should say, and get the other side, make sure that's totally loose, and then we'll use our hand tools to get this thing off. Now a couple conceptual things to understand. So when you're putting the tire onto the wheel or taking it off the wheel, to get the most stretch out of it, in other words, to allow the tire to move as far as it can relative to the wheel, you need to have the bead off like we just did, and that bead needs to sit in, it's kind of a well. In the middle of the rim, in here, is an area of its deepest point, and you need that bead on the opposite of the end that you're working to be in that deepest point. And that will allow enough room on the other side so that you can get a tool in here and pry it off. Now, I'm going to be using these protectors. They're just plastic rim protectors, and then various spoons that I have. I have other ones too, but these seem to do a pretty good job for me. And you want some kind of lube for the bead. Now, when I'm putting the tire on, I'm more concerned about that than taking it off. But even taking it off, it just makes it a little easier. For taking it off, I'm just going to use this Windex or glass cleaner, but for putting the new one back on, I'll use some other stuff I'll show you. Alright, that's about a minute and a half of struggle there, not too bad. So, once you have this side off, then we're just going to flip it around and get the other side off the same edge of the rim. That lube really makes a difference, or some kind of, God, even water would make a difference if that's all you had. So, I'm going to flip this around, and you see that deep well there now. So now, from this side, I'll do the same thing, and I just got to be careful I don't drop the wheel after the tire pops out. Usually once you get about half of the bead off, you can pull the rest by hand if it's not too big a tire. So here's the setup to get the remaining side off, right? So I have a rim protector here, but you see the blue in this area right here, that's where I'm actually prying. If I look at the opposite side here, it's on that side. So now I just need to pry this edge off, this bead off, and once I get it started, the rest will pop right off. Again, I want to put some lube on here. So here's a better shot of that well on the inside. So that bead, when you're putting the new one on or taking the old one off, opposite of where you're working, needs to be centered in this deep well here, and that will allow the whole tire to drop down further than it otherwise would. Now you can see here the inside. This is an aluminum wheel, aluminum alloy wheel, and the inside here was never cleaned up the last time the tires were applied here, and I didn't do it, someone else did, a shop did it. So I like to clean this up. And the outside obviously is a great opportunity to clean the outside, but I want this area right here where the bead's going to sit to be nice and clean and shiny, and I'm sure it's going to seal. So I'll take some time to, polish that up. By the way, I did a video earlier, another time, about putting a plug in a motorcycle tire. If you're ever curious what the plug looks like from the inside, this is it. So you can see it sealed pretty well. Alright, I've got both wheels pretty well cleaned up in the bead area now. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I like to clean that up, and that's really one big difference between having a shop do this and doing it yourself, is you can take the time to do this kind of thing. So this accomplishes two things. One, the bead has a better chance of sealing long term when it's nice and smooth like this. Because if you have bumps and leftover rubber from other tires and that sort of thing, air can eventually leak out and water can get in even. The other thing is the tire will go on, the new tire will go on easier when it doesn't hang up on those little bits of rubber and stuff there. And long term, as far as moisture and water getting in here, aluminum can corrode, and you can get an area here, if it corrodes enough, where it doesn't even seal anymore. So I take the time to clean this up, put a little automotive wax on that. This stuff works great. It's like a cleaner wax or anything like that. And that way I got a nice clean area for the new bead. Two more quick things. One, you notice I did not take the old wheel weights off yet. And I used to do that, just clean everything and start over again. But then I started to realize, I wised up, that part of the balance, or a lot of the balance, is the wheel itself. And oftentimes you'll mount the new tire, leave the old weights on, and it's perfectly balanced. So I started just leaving those on. If it's wrong, I can take it off later. The other thing I want to mention is that aluminum wheels, some of them have a coating, a clear coating on them. And you don't want to go scratching those up or trying to wax them or anything like that. So the way you can tell is, if you get this gray material like this, then it does not have the coating. So if you get an inconspicuous area, just take a little bit of automotive wax or rubbing compound or metal cleaner or anything like that, and just do a quick little rub. And if you get some of this gray off of where you rubbed, then it's not coated. For getting the new tires on, one of the first things you want to do if you have the opportunity is to heat them up in the sun. If a tire is warm, it's a lot more flexible than otherwise, and these particular tires I'm about to put on are very stiff to begin with. So warm them up in the sun, that'll make it easier. You need something to lubricate the bead of the new tire. In the past I've used a mix of water and dishwashing detergent, kind of a pasty mix. Windex, that all works fine, but I thought I'd try something different here. I just got this. I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, but it's meant for this purpose. It's kind of a weird paste. It's slick to the touch even. So we'll give it a try, but you need something to lubricate that bead. Now, one thing of critical importance, and it's easy to forget, is that tires have a direction. So right on the tire will be printed an arrow, and this says front. It'll say something like that, but it has an arrow pointing in the direction the tire will roll to go forward once it's mounted. So I look at that direction, I look at my wheel, and I make sure I have it oriented in a way that I recognize so that it's going forward. In this case, I know the speedometer is on the right side, so that means the tire will be going this way. So this would not be the right way to mount the tire. I need to flip it end for end, and I'll be fine. All right, so that's the first bead on, right? So, you know, this second bead on this side is not on yet, but the first one is buried in that well. Now, I'm going to start at the bottom here and work my way up. I could put some more of that lube on there, and it'll be easy at first, but once I start to get to the top here, then it'll start to get more difficult. But I need to get that tire, the bead on the bottom here, buried in that well that we showed you earlier. Also, I should mention, make sure you don't have the valve in the way as well. Some valves have not just the valve on the inside, but also a TPMS monitor, or tire pressure monitor, which can get in the way, so you got to be careful of that. But so I'll get this buried in the bottom here, and then I'll work on the top, getting it on. Now, if I have trouble on the bottom here, you can kneel on it. Now, I don't weigh very much, and my knees are killing me anyway, so sometimes that doesn't work. If you can't kneel on it, the other way of doing it is to take a couple wood blocks and a clamp and squeeze this tire together here in the bottom so it fits into that well. Okay, so that's about the point where it's going to get difficult to get the rest of this on unless you have this in the center well. So I'll get that wood block and just show you what I do, and then we'll buy a little more space. All right, so you can see over here I got that wood block and clamp in place here, and that just squeezes the tire together a little bit so I can get that bead in the middle of the well there. You can use your knees. Some people have more luck with that, and sometimes I do too, but in this case it's getting a little tight. And this is a lot easier with a second person to give you a hand just holding this thing down. Really, these rim protectors are more than anything are the thing you end up fussing about. Now this is the point where it's nice to have a third hand, but I don't, so. We're almost there. There it is. So, Take these out, take this clamp off. You don't hurt anything with the clamp. Alright, now we need to set the bead. And we still want that lube when we're setting the bead. Now, all I'm going to do is apply a whole bunch of air to this all at once. The valve core is out. So what I'm going to do, because that allows more air to get in more quickly, so I'm going to lube this up again, put a, the air on here with the valve core out, pump a whole bunch of air in all at once, and hopefully we'll hear this pop. Make sure I get all the air in this. We'll get our air here. Keep your fingers clear of the edge. It's starting to come out. Now as I'm getting near here, I'm taking a look at this area. That's the area I squeezed. I'm going to get a little more lube going here. Alright, you heard that double pop. That was the bead setting. Now the bead is set, but I want to make sure it's set right. So I want to take a real close look at the edge here and make sure it's symmetrical all the way around. And I don't have any, because sometimes the bead can set, but it may be caught lower than it should, and that's a problem. So you want to check both sides very closely to make sure it's set correctly. I still have the valve core out. So there's no more air in this, but the bead is set against the edge of the rim. That's what I want. The other thing I want to check a second time is that, where is it? That I have my arrow correctly oriented, because it's so easy to do that. So just take another look at that. Now once you're sure the bead is set correctly and you're good to go, it's time to put the valve core in. If you look at this bead and you go, uh-oh, we got a problem here, it didn't seat correctly, don't freak out. Get your little redneck bead breaker out again, break the bead, start over, and use more lube, and that's probably all you're going to need. But now we can set the valve core. So you got your little valve core tool here. We're going to use this end here and the valve core itself. And let's see if I can do this left-handed. You're just going to insert this like that, get it started. You don't need to crank this down like a monkey. I mean, it doesn't need a whole lot of pressure to seat correctly, but you're going to get that started. It's seated now. Just get a little bit more of a turn. That's all you need. You don't have to kill it. And that's it. Now we'll just add pressure, to the recommended pressure that we need, and we're good to go. All right, that's the rear tire done. Maybe it's easier to see here. There's a little bit of a rubber line here in the rubber, and you want that line to be, symmetrical all the way around the rim. So that's how you check that. So with both tires on here now, the last thing to do would be balance. And that may vary depending on what equipment you have or how you're going to do this, but I'll show you a little bit of how I balance it. All right, this is my balancing setup. It's very simple. I just have some jack stands, something to hold the tire off the ground. And basically all this is, it has these cones on both sides. It's a mirror image. These cones that are tapered so they fit into the inner race of the bearing. And then these blocks right here just sit on top of the jack stand, and the blocks themselves have good bearings in them. So if I just hold the wheel in one spot and let go, it's going to tend to seek the heaviest area. Now to balance this, it's really just a matter of finding the heaviest area and putting a number of weights or a weight on the opposite side of where it's heavy. You're going to need wheel weights, self-adhesive wheel weights, and what I do is I just use painter's tape. So I temporarily tape the weight onto the area I think I need and keep testing. Once I'm happy with it, then I take this temporary tape off and put the weight on for good. Now your balancing setup might be a little bit different, but one thing I want to point out is that you can go crazy trying to get it perfectly balanced. So there's a point at which it really doesn't matter anymore. So I mean, if you're holding it and it's turning like a tiny bit like that, it's balanced. It's good enough. But if you're holding it and you let go and it goes like this, drops right down, well, yeah, you got a problem. So just, use some common sense. You don't really need to go to the nth degree here. You just got to get it basically balanced. I should also mention that in the old days, old timers will know this, the tires would come with like a little sticker on them, which was supposed to be the heaviest spot. And, you could use that and balance it out by placing that opposite of the, the valve up here. But the modern tires are so balanced to start with that they just stopped doing that, so it's really not an issue anymore. You can mount this wherever you want. But you still need to balance it. So take a little time, whatever your setup is, if it looks like this or something else, just relax, take a little bit of time to get it relatively balanced, and then that's good enough.